This is going to be a very fun coding exercise. This one's going to be quite a bit longer than most of them, and it's because I wanted to build out some type of exercise that combined all kinds of different knowledge, and so it's going to take a little while to build it out. And the other reason why I wanted to create this specific exercise is because it really shows some of the power of test-driven development. Now, if you've been following along with the coding exercises for a while, there are, I believe now, around 90 or nearly 100 of them that I have posted so far. And one thing that you may have noticed is every coding exercise has a set of RSpec tests. Now, I haven't really gone into detail on them, except to say that I run the test, and if the test passes, then it means that we've built this out properly. However, this is, in having these kind of tests here, it does more than just giving a automated assessment to see that if you wrote the code the right way and if it generated the right result. That is very nice, but it does something else, and that is, not only do I write these coding exercises, I also perform the implementation. That's what you see me doing on the screencast. And in order to do that, I have played around with a few different kinds of variations. I've played around with the approach where I just start writing the program. I have an idea of what I want to build, and then I write a test to match it. And for very basic cases, that works fine. But there are other times where I may not really know the end result that I want. And if I try that first approach, kind of the naive approach where I simply try to start coding, then what always seems to happen is I get stuck and I have a hard time not only just with the implementation, but with trying to decide what type of output I'm looking to do. And this is a great example of this. I wanted to build a scoreboard application because I thought it'd be a very fun interview question. It's one I've done before. And if you're watching around the end of March, baseball season is about to start. So I thought this would be kind of a neat thing. And in fact, part of what inspired this is because I went on a website that wasn't doing this properly. They had a little bug and they weren't tallying up the number of runs in the game. And so I wanted to build something to show how you could do that properly. So I started building it out. And I just started getting stuck because I didn't have a very clear view of the finish line. I had a vague idea of what I wanted to build, but I didn't have like a clearly defined end goal that I knew this is my input and this is my output. And that can be a really bad situation as a developer. So I deleted all of the code and I decided to write my tests first. So I wrote 3 different tests, and what this did is it gave me a clear finish line. It allowed me to say, this is exactly what I want to build out. This is the input I want to receive, and this is the output that I want to get. So let's talk about that. And sorry, that was a little bit of a not rant, but longer description than normal, but it's mainly because I have gotten a few questions from students wondering why I put tests on each one. And then also I think it's important to understand why TDD is important in general, and that is that it can really give you some good focus. So right here, you can see that we are going to have to create a class called Scoreboard. So we're going to build a class called Scoreboard, and then we should have the ability to instantiate it, and we also should have the ability to pass in a team name. From that point, we can see that there is going to be a method here called addRun. So addRun looks like takes a single attribute or a single argument called inning. And so we pass in addRun and then the whatever inning it is. So imagine that we're building this program out either for a website dashboard or even a script, and imagine that a big scoreboard is taking this module or this class, and it takes that, and the individual who's keeping track of the score, presses one button, it activates this addRun method, and then it adds it. So at the very end, so the expectation is that we can call team and then generate total, and then this should equal 3. And this makes sense because I've called add run 3 times, which means that there should be 3 total runs by the end of the game. That makes sense. And this actually shows the bug that I saw on one of the baseball websites where a team had scored 4 or 5 runs and the total was showing 0. It wasn't actually counting it up. So that was the whole inspiration for this exercise. Now, moving down, let's talk about the next one. So the first test made sure that we could call a method called generate total, and it would generate the total number of runs for that team. Next, it says it should generate a hash with the total runs scored each inning. So this one's a little bit different. So this one says that we should have the ability to create a new scoreboard, pass in a team, and then pass in and call the add run method for each inning, and then team score here. And technically I don't need that. That was for debugging purposes. So the expectation is that team.score should equal this hash, and this hash is Astros. And so this is the team name right here. And then inside of this hash is a nested hash, and the nested hash contains a integer on the left-hand side. So the key is going to be 1 followed by 2 followed by 3. So that is going to be each one of the keys, and we are going to go all the way through 9 innings. Now the value, so what's on the right-hand side of the hash, this is the number of runs that were scored in that inning. So you can see right here that in inning 3, the team scored 2 runs. So what that means is that if we look at this hash, we can see in inning 3, there were 2 runs scored. So if you imagine a giant scoreboard out in right field, you can see where every inning has however many runs a team scored that inning. And then the next thing, the last test, says it should generate a hash with the inning and 0 values for the runs each inning when a scoreboard is created. So if you notice right here, this is kind of just giving a base case where it says scoreboard.new pass in Astros. It takes in the name, and then from there it gives us just an empty scoreboard, which is what we're looking for in a real life scenario. This is what we'd need. Okay, so that was way more prep than usual, but I think it's important because do you notice how if I were to have just gone into it just like I started doing and try to build a scoreboard application, there would be a lot of fuzziness. I would have a very difficult time deciding what the final data structure should look like, what the methods should do. And so by being able to say, this is what I want the end result to be, these are the features I want, it gave me a clear finish line, and it allowed me to focus on the implementation instead of worrying about what that end result needed to be. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a class, or define a class here called Scoreboard. Now, one thing that may be a little bit different here than what you're used to, I should say, is let's talk about what type of data we need. So we know that we need the ability to get a team, and that's something that's going to be inside of our initializer. And we know we're going to have innings inside of certain methods, but those are just an argument. And we have generate method, or generate total, which is going to be a method. And if we keep coming down, there's only one real piece of data that we need to grab, and that is our score right here. Now, score technically is not going to be a method. It's just going to be a piece of data. So what that tells me is that we need the ability to grab that data. So I'm going to give an adder reader and say score. What this is going to allow us to do is to just do exactly what I'm doing on line 22, where it says I have the ability to say team.score, and this gives me that hash. Now, how can we actually assign some of those values? Well, this is where I think this is going to be kind of a cool way of setting defaults in the class, where I can say initialize We know we need a team whenever we instantiate a new scoreboard. And then inside of that, I'm going to assign team to a instance variable. Now after that, now I want to actually work with the score. Now the score is going to be a little bit trickier because remember, our score needs to both have a default, but it also needs to be dynamic. So in other words, as you can see down on line 27, it needs to be dynamic in the sense that it can change over the course of the game. And then it also, as you can see on line 32, it needs to start off with all of these defaults. It needs all of the inning numbers, and then it needs all of the values to start off at 0. So how are we going to do that? Well, I wouldn't put it here in the initialize method. I think that would be a poor practice. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to just call a method we're going to create. So I'm going to call score builder. And now we don't have that method, so let's define that. And this is what's going to give us our very basic default score. So essentially it's going to give us what we have there on line 34. So I'm going to say this is score builder. It's not going to take any arguments. And in fact, I'm going to come down to line 34. And I'm just going to copy this. And this is what we're going to use with a few little modifications. First thing is this is going to return a hash. And I'll just paste in the hash. There we go. Okay, so we obviously don't want to hard code Astros in there. So the first thing that I'm going to do is instead of calling Astros, I'm going to say team. So here I'm going to say team, and there's a little trick here. And that is that usually you may have seen the syntax for creating hashes where you do something like this, where I could say, something like, team just like this, followed by a colon, and then, you could put anything you want as the value. And that is the modern syntax. However, there is a little gotcha there when you're working with things such as instance variables, because what's going on here is the system would try to convert this into a symbol, and we would get an error on that side. So we can't use that syntax. We have to use the older syntax, which is this right here. And that is going to give us what we need. So now we have a score builder, and it is going to communicate with that team instance variable. So this is going to be Astros when you pass in Astros. It's going to be Padres when you set Padres whenever you create a new scoreboard. And it's going to give us a blank scoreboard. And if you want, you can arrange it a little bit better. One thing that usually you want to do, just as kind of a best practice in Ruby, is you want to make your code as readable as possible. And especially for a scoreboard application, I don't think it really makes sense to put that all on one line. So I'm going to do that. And yes, I know from a Vim perspective, a macro would do that, but I'm just going to build it just like that. It's only 9 elements. So, okay, so here we have a score builder. And this is everything we need. So let's actually just test this out. I'm going to say team and scoreboard.new, pass in, this time we'll do the Padres. And now if I call team.score, this should work. So let's make sure we don't have any kind of syntax issues. So line 29 should be giving us that, and there you go. Look at that. So here we have a working score, and this is a hash. It took Padres as the team name, and then it created a blank scoreboard. It has each one of the innings as keys, but the values are all set to 0. That's perfect. So if we were to look at the test, it means that we have now successfully done this one. So that is working nicely. Now, technically, we have implemented part of this. We have the ability to call team.score, and it generates that hash for us. But now we need to add some methods. The first one we're going to do is for test 1. Let's build a generate total method, and then we also need the ability to go in and then add runs. But first, let's just work with generating a total. So I'm going to say generate total. It's not going to take any arguments. It's going to be working with data that the class has. So I can say score, and then inside of score, I'll say team. And notice this is the hash syntax for just grabbing an element. So what this is going to do is it's going to say, I want to grab the hash for this team. Because remember, because this is a nested hash, we need to grab this team value. We can't just start assigning those items. So we can't just go in and say, oh, I want to change inning 1, 2, or 3, because we first have to do it in an iterative approach. We have to say, here is my team. This is a team I want to work with, and that's what we're doing. So I'm saying, here is the team in that hash, and now inside of this, now I'm going to grab all of the values. So before we go on too far, let's just see what this does for us. So if I now say generate total, now if I run this code, let's see what we get. And that's perfect. Okay, so this is exactly what we're looking for. It's not the answer, we're not done, but I like to show you, especially in something a little bit longer, a little bit more complex, I like to take a more methodical step-by-step approach. So what exactly is going on right here? Well, we know that score is a hash. We know that we need to select the team. Score technically only has one key in it, which is team. And then from there, we're calling the values method. Now what values will do is values is going to go and literally do what it says. It's going to grab those values. So here you have the keys and you have values. So here I'm just saying I don't care about the keys right now. I only care about the value, because here all we're looking to do is sum up the total. We don't care about what inning it came in. If there is a 5 in the first inning, a 2 in the 4th inning, then we don't care about we don't care what inning it came in. We just total it up, and that's what the total is. So now with that in place, or I shouldn't say, we're not quite done. We still need to keep adding to it. So we have the values. Now we just have to add on to it and sum them up. So I'm going to say inject, use ampersand syntax, and then just say plus. So now I'm going to do something that may seem a little bit weird, but it's because I want to show you exactly the way that I built this solution originally, and that is a step-by-step approach. So if I run this code right now, it's still going to say 0, which makes sense. So that tells us everything is working, because if you tally up all these values, it equals 0. Now, what happens if I hard code a few of these in? So I added 3, 4, and 1. So my total should now be 8. If I run the code again, you can see that it is working and the total is at 8, which is perfect. I'm going to undo these. If you're following along, make sure you undo it as well, or else you're going to end up with some very weird totals. So we have that working, but our system isn't still operational because we're missing a very important component, and that is the ability to add runs. And both tests 1 and 2 both need that ability. But now we have our total in place, so let's come here and build out our add run. So I'm going to say add underscore run. You know from looking at the test that this is going to take an inning as an argument, and then from here we can simply perform a increment. So I'll say score, grab that team, remember that's what we want, and then grab the inning and then increment it by 1. So what am I doing here? This may seem a little bit odd, and don't worry if it does. So what we're doing with add run is, if you come down to when this is called, we're saying add run, we're passing in an inning, and then it will automatically add a new run. So it goes in, it selects the team, then you can use the bracket syntax right next to each other. So here we're saying the inning, and with the inning, whatever the value is, we know it's going to start at 0, but say the value is 5, it's just going to increment it by 1. So if the value is 5, it will be 6. So let's come here, and I'm going to add some runs now. So I'm going to say add run, inning, and we'll say 4. So we're going to have 4 runs in the 4th inning. Let's do one more just so that's not confusing. And let's add 1 in the 9th inning. So right here, what we're going to do is we're going to have 1 run in the 9th and then 5 in the 4th. So that's going to give us a total of 6. And now if I run that and run generate total, this should give us our total. And there you go. Right here, line 43, you can see that this is now totaling it up for us. So far, so good. We only have one thing left to test, which is the score. So if I see what the score is, you can see that we now have a fully functioning scoreboard. So we have the team name, we have a tracker that is following every inning. In the 1st inning, there were no runs. 2nd, same. 3rd, same. 4th inning, there were 5 runs, all the way to the 9th inning when there was 1 run. So this is all working very nicely. Let's come down here. I'm going to delete this output, and I'm going to open up the test. I'll run them here on the right-hand side. This is for March 13th. So if I run this, I should have 3 examples that are all passing, and they are. So very nice. This was a much longer coding exercise than normal, but I wanted to give you a good idea of what types of questions you may get when you're personally interviewing, when you're going through a coding interview and you want to see exactly what they're looking for. In this case, when I ask this question, I'm looking for the student's ability to work with classes, attributes in classes, methods in those classes such as getters like we did with the adder reader, and then also how to work and parse different types of hashes as well. So there's all kinds of things that this test, so it's a really good one to get familiar with. And we also even got a little bit into enumeration, or the enumerable module with values, and then how to use functional programming with inject. So all kinds of good things that allowed us to practice it, and I also think it's a really fun one. So I hope you really enjoyed that and you learned something, and I will see you in the next exercise.